Hi friends, this is your pal Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about um, Magic the Gathering's 2026 release cycle, specifically the first set that's coming out, the Lorwyn Eclipsed set. And I want to look at it this from the perspective of Dungeons and Dragons. So let's look at Lorwyn Eclipsed and talk about what it actually is. So what's interesting is Lorwyn is canon to D&D. Basically, Magic connected itself to Dungeons and Dragons a long time ago, and has continued to like tie itself closer and closer together with Dungeons and Dragons. MTG is canon to D&D, D&D is canon to MTG. Um, what's really interesting is Lorwyn Eclipsed Lorwyn is this distinct fantasy world for Magic the Gathering. I think it's the only setting that does not have humans. This human species. There's not a single card in Lorwyn that includes humans, which is really fascinating. And then um, they're really not. They're not native to Lorwyn, right? So what's interesting is then you get this question of, well, what actually are they specific to? And what becomes interesting is you have these elementals, you have these Kithkin, and then the elves themselves. But Lorwyn is this special fantasy world where every few years there's this astronomical event, and when it happens, essentially it does become eclipsed, but it stops being Lorwyn and it turns into Shadowmoor, and it inverses everything. So all these very nice species become pretty evil, right? And it becomes literally a dark, shadowed world. What's really interesting is the elves are kind of jerks in Lorwyn. So when it gets eclipsed and turns into Shadowmoor, which was a second set, the elves actually become nice, which is real. It's one of the more unique. I thought that was a very unique aspect. I thought that's really fascinating, and it's a really interesting aspect of Lorwyn Eclipsed. So Lorwyn Eclipsed is kind of a misnomer. Lorwyn Eclipsed is simply Shadowmoor, right? So why are they bringing out the Lorwyn Eclipsed set? Well, one of the things so we already have Lorwyn and we have Shadowmoor, and they are really both Lorwyn sets, right? The reason they're attaching Lorwyn is there's more goodwill attached to the Lorwyn name than Shadowmoor, and there should be, right? Because that's the core. Shadowmoor is just this period that almost like Alaska when it gets that period where the sun doesn't shine for months or weeks. Kind of interesting. And then, but what's interesting is, I think with a lot of these old worlds, with like Zendikar and Innistrad, these worlds that they return to, the reason they're returning to them is so far we just have Lorwyn and we have Shadowmoor, right? There's like 300 cards in Lorwyn and like 200 cards in Shadowmoor. That's it, right? Like, and these are entire worlds, right? So while Dungeons and Dragons has hundreds of pages to define these worlds, Magic the Gathering is much more limited, right? So when they come back with these cards, it's really just to blow out the world through the lore, visually and textually, right? So, which I think is really interesting. Now, who is this set going to make happy, right? So first, and who is it not going to make happy? So the people that this will make happy are the people who are down in the weeds, actual MTG stands, right? Like, and like Magic the Gathering's freestanding fantasy worlds. And there are quite a few. Every time you go to a pre-release with I was at the Marvel, I went to the Marvel Spider-Man Magic the Gathering pre-release, and beforehand I asked some friends, and they're all like, "Oh no, I don't do any of that Universes Beyond." I'm like, "Well, it's not a Universes Beyond set," and they're like, "You know what I mean, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know that they're retiring Universes Beyond. You're seeing it less and less. It's just kind of getting, and it's not being retired. It's kind of being sunset slowly, right? Because it's upsetting people, right? Because they wanted to think that Magic the Gathering had this freestanding fantasy world, but it doesn't. It's completely mixed. It's part of the D&D multiverse, which is already connected to many, many, many intellectual properties. Well over 100, maybe close to 500. It's incredible how many IPs D&D is connected to. It's truly incredible. So it is going to make them happy. Who is it not going to make happy? I don't think it's going to make investors happy. This is not going to be one of their top selling sets. It's just not. One of the reasons why they're doing so many of these IP sets is they're so much more successful than any of these bog standard freestanding Magic the Gathering fantasy worlds, which are just terrible sellers comparatively, right? So I don't think it's going to make investors happy, and then we'll have to see if it makes players happy, because what players actually care about is which is really interesting. Players care about how much power is in the set. What are the mechanics on the cards? Players who actually play Magic the Gathering to win, the lore is not nearly as important to them as the mechanics that actually show up on the cards, which is really interesting. So I definitely think this is going to make investors sad. This is going to make MTG lore stands happy, and I think it's going. And we will see if they actually put any real power in this. It's unlikely. It's very unlikely, and one of the reasons why is us. And we definitely saw this at Magic Gathering. Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man. A lot of times, some of the most powerful stuff is connected to these IPs. And one of the reasons why is when they make these IP deals, they have somebody else who's invested in this selling very, very well. They want to send millions of dollar checks every month to these IP collaborators, right? So that more people get in line. And it has been working, so it'll be interesting to see. Every single word you just heard in this video is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.